We are joined today by our beautiful elders and our advocates who are at the front here. Can everyone see? And if you can't, you're more than welcome to stand up and move forward, move your chairs forward. If you want to move around, like Lynn said, you're more than welcome to do that as well. So we've got Auntie Seema. Put your hand up, please. We've got their names at the front too, just so you can see. Auntie Elsha and Uncle Willie Prince. We've also got our advocates here, Louise from QAI, Bridget, that's fine. We've got Cassie from Mob, and we've also got Michaela, who's our community advocate, and we've got Mitch Metcalf as well. So we would like to start with some questions for our elders. So we'll start with Auntie Elsha first. Auntie, I know I've had lots of yarns with you and I love hearing you talk. You're very passionate, in everything that you talk about, especially from a grassroots level. We'll get you to introduce yourself, please, if that's all right. Bit of a background of who you are and where you come from before we get started.
Good morning. I am Deba Garale. So I'm Aboriginal on my mother's side. So I'm Lutki Garikana Guran and Seven Rivers from up near the Cape in the far north Queensland. And I'm Torres Strait Islander on my father's side. So born on Thursday Island, kicked about between Cairns and the Torres Straits, then lived in Canberra, I don't know why, but moved to Canberra for 18 years, and then came back to Queensland because this is where home is. So I'm currently with ADA Australia. Shout out to all my ADA family out there. I'll meet you later for a big hug. And I'm biased, they're the bomb. I'm biased, but they're the bomb. And they're my backbone when I don't have any energy. I'm an advocate for aged care and disability. I don't so much do disability space anymore, but I still work along, thank you. But I still work along my colleagues and help them where I can. I've worked in government for over 35 years in the social justice space. But I've come across to this organisation and I didn't find the job found me. And thanks to Rebecca Danilov, she messages me and she says, can you put in an application for this job? What job? So, I am truly blessed. I am truly blessed to be able to give a voice to those that don't have a voice. I've been blessed tremendously. And I thank you. I thank Auntie for her welcome. Yesterday, I'd like to acknowledge that it was National Sorry Day yesterday. And I actually watched the speech from Kevin Rudd. And when I first watched it, it meant nothing. And when I watched it yesterday, it meant everything. It meant everything to me in the space that we work in. We're not working with only a physical disability, but we work with emotional disabilities as well. And we've got so much to do. We've only scratched the surface. But thanks to people like you, like yourselves, there's only one of me, there's only one Laurel, there's only one Chloe, there's only one Mel. But we have brilliant people like yourselves that get out there in our space and work with our people with utmost respect and reverence for life. And I thank you from the bottom of my heart for your efforts. Now, I'll have to send it over to Auntie Seema because I can talk underwater. Even if the Titanic's on top of me.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Seema Mokatwishki. I am a Jugan woman from Broome, Western Australia, and I was brought up in remote Northern Territory on the Adelaide River. My introduction to disability started 33 years ago. I have a son who is 33 and he has multiple disability, high complex disabilities as a result of birth injury, as an injury at birth. So my introduction to disability has brought me here by him, and it's been an extraordinary journey. I used to be quiet and demure, my husband used to say, but now I've turned into the loud warrior mother. And I guess that there are a lot of mothers and family members that have become like us, or because we've had to become assertive, we've had to advocate. So a little bit about my son. He has high complex disabilities. He's non-verbal. He's kind. He's loving. He's everything, but he's also extremely complex. And we live in the world of complexity of disability. So trying to bring that human element in the areas of bureaucracy can become quite challenging for families. So having advocates like you all in the room today who are standing up for people that are voiceless and teaching people new ways to think, as Auntie Catherine's Welcome to Country about, I can't remember the exact words, the quote that she read from Einstein. We have to change our thinking. But we also have to be watchful of the thinking that we need to change for the people in positions that place more limitations and barriers on us. So that's a little bit about me. I'm a advocate mother. I'm involved in a lot of different things. I wear different hats because I've been invited in because of people have seen where I walk with my journey. So thank you, everybody.
Hey, my name is Mitch Metcalf, pronouns he, him. I work with Queensland Council for LGBTI Health. I've been there for about 3 years. And currently, we, myself alongside Annabelle, who you'll hear from later in the conference, is we're seconded to QAI, and we're doing a really cool pilot project about advocacy and queer people. And you'll hear a bit about that kind of later on in the panel. But yeah, I'm Yagara, I believe, based around Coorparoo, my ancestors going back a couple of generations, but I'm a mutt, because I'm Chinese, Malaysian, First Nations, English, Irish, so it's a bit going on. But yeah, I love being around here, I love travel, wear a lot of different hats. I was a title holder in the queer community called Mr. Bear Queensland last year, so I got to represent all the big hairy guys down in Melbourne. But I also use another name called DJ Gallion, and you're going to hear that later on at the launch event. So yeah, it's really, really cool to be here.
You're standing here.
You're next.
Am I? Okay. So I'm in a lineup. Yeah. I don't know what to say because it's a hard act to follow with Artie's acknowledgement of country and some of the other presenters up here telling them about themselves. I don't know where to start because my journey started way back when I was born. I was born in Cherbourg during the 1960s. It was at a time when the government of the day had absolutely control over the lives of Aboriginal people, and they moved them around the country, took them off to their traditional homelands, and displaced them, and they mixed them up with other cultural groups, you know, and it was very hard, you know, for our mob back then, you know, when you were even punished for even speaking your own language, or learning your own song and dance. That was absolutely forbidden. But for me, I have a long story, but to cut it short, if you ever want to know about my story, go online to the National Library in Canberra. They got my story. The National Stolen Generation. Go online, they got my story. 98.9. You go online, they got my story. As well as hearing my story in person. Where do I begin? Yeah, I was born in June. At the time of my birth, there was something wrong with me. I was in and out of hospital some 16 times before my first birthday. And at the time, when I was born in Cherbourg, it was even denied, that it existed, but it was malnutrition in the Cherbourg community that made a lot of children sick. And unfortunately, I was one of those who, on the result of malnutrition and other introduced illnesses at the time. And with that, at that time, there was two most powerful people appointed by the government of the day, the chief protector or the administrator. If you don't know who or what that person did, that person looked after and administered the everyday goings on about Aboriginal missions and stations. The other most powerful person of the day that nobody really speaks about was the state medical doctor. That person was the most frightening of all, even more frightening than the chief protector, because that person had absolutely power to remove you to anywhere. Unfortunately, I came under the watchful eye of the doctor at the time in the Cherbourg Hospital, and together with the doctor and the state medical doctor, they were delivering over my, and the chief protector, they were delivering what was going to happen to me. And with all three of them sat around a table with a white piece of paper in front of them. One had a pen. With the stroke of a pen, my life changed. For 17 years, I was now the property of the government of the day. I was removed from Cherbourg without consultation from family or community members whatsoever. No one was there. I was quickly taken away quietly and moved to Brisbane, where I was to remain for the rest of my life to this present day. I was put into the Royal Children's Hospital. I was, for further diagnosis and stuff like that. I was seen by a visiting specialist, not by an Australian doctor or anybody like that. It was a visiting specialist from England. I later found out through what I had at the time. I had a file about that big. Everything that happened to me, there was a piece of paper added to that file, and it grew and grew and grew, like so many thousands upon thousands of Aboriginal people at the time. I later found out that the very same doctor that diagnosed me from England wanted to take me back with him to England. Had he done so, I would have been living in England to this very day. Wouldn't even know if I was Aboriginal or where I came from whatsoever. I thank God my mother never signed me list papers, because had she done so, I would have been on the open market for adoption. And you can even look up that in the Courier Mail. I had a photo taken of me as a 5-year-old, all dressed up to the nines. That photo was for adoption. And you can, yeah. So, yeah, so, what happened then was, I went to an institution where I was remaining from babyhood to the early teenage years. And one of the things that stuck out with me to this very day was when I was in the playground with all the other kids. And we were just mucking around like kids do, in the play yard. And then out of the blue, one of the kids wheeled up to me and said, "You're different." And I said, how is that? He said, "You're different," but I tried to point out to him that the kid over there is in a wheelchair, the kid over there as well. You look around you, we're surrounded by kids in wheelchairs. But he still said I was different. Until he said I was black. I didn't even know what he was talking about. And it was up to one of the nuns in the institution to tell me I was Aboriginal. I was not told by an Aboriginal person in the community or whatever. I was told that I was Aboriginal by a white nun. And that got me thinking. And fast forward, I was given that opportunity when I worked at the State Library of Queensland. That allowed me to discover who I was, find out about my Aboriginality, where I came from, what was the word Aboriginal. And as I delved deeply into the history of what our Aboriginal people were, and who they were, and where they were from, I was more or less able to find some sort of relief. To finally found who I was. But I was still excluded from my community because I was slightly different, because I was a person with a disability. And don't get me wrong, at the time, there was not a lot said about Aboriginal people with disability. How do we help? How do we help you? How do we help ourselves to help you? And there were, and through that phrase, through that time, there were organisations that sprung up purely out of the interest of Aboriginal people wanted to find out how to help themselves and how to help other people, to find out, their place in this world. And that's how I became involved in this world of, because I thank God that my journey took me down the road to a place of discovery, and that was the State Library. And when I went there, it opened the doors for me to find out, all that stuff. But I then started looking elsewhere, and there were other organisations, disability organisations out there during the 1970s. Was a time of because it was a time that government didn't really know much about the world of disability or the people who had disabilities. We were like fighting to be recognised, fighting to get a voice. And we were like similar to Judy Hyman, who was the founder of the American Disability Rights Movement. I later found out too that Judy Hyman and a group of people with disabilities, they stood up for themselves. And we did that very same thing here in Australia during the 1970s. We stood up for ourselves. It didn't matter if walls were built up in front of us. We just knocked them down. We sat at the doors of government. We didn't flinch or move until they came out to speak to us. We weren't frightened in those days for our voice to be heard. And I thank God, organisations like QAI and Speaking Up For You and Community Resource Unit, they were and other organisations, they were the steps or the ramps that smooth the way, so we can get there. And but in the world of Indigenous disability, it has many meanings. It's not pertaining to one particular issue. So it's very hard, to advocate or talk about our mob when it comes to disability, because we don't understand it ourselves until we come forward and tell our stories. Yeah, and so in closing, I'd like to acknowledge the early pioneers of the disability rights movement here in Australia and thank them for the work and for what they did, because if they didn't do what they did, I wouldn't be up here talking to you, because I wouldn't know how to speak. I wouldn't know how to get up there. But they're pioneers of our disability rights movement that paved the way for us to be here. Thank you.
And we've got Bridget joining us. Thank you so much. She's coming a bit late, but better late than never.
Sorry about that. Thank you for having me on the panel, guys. Really appreciate that. I think the only thing I can add to this is that when you are pigeonholed into a certain identity, it makes it hard for you to break away from the stigma. And for me, being on the panel, it's great to get insight from you guys. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, aunties and uncles, for sharing your stories. I guess I'd love to hear, your perspective now in today's 2025. I know that you talked about the history and your experiences, but what do you think is going well now, and what would you change, and what's not going well in regards to modelling with disabilities?
Me again. I think we've still got a long way to go, and thank you, Uncle. I acknowledge your efforts and the efforts of others. For Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, there's a history. And those that were born back in the day with a disability, it was either a curse, or which is black magic, or shame, they don't speak about it. So for us to have this space where we can get assistance for our family members or the community for those with disabilities, we've only scratched the surface. We've got to create safe spaces for our people to come forward, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders to come forward. And that's hard in itself because in the Torres Strait Island community and in our culture, we have laws. And even in the Aboriginal culture, we have laws. So, and I'll explain the Torres Strait Island law. And the law that they have in the Torres Straits is the Malo. Malo te teki teki te te teki teki arere. Don't let your feet carry yourself forward until you get permission. So when we work in this space where we're trying to help people, we've got to understand these laws. We've got to be able to articulate them and catch them, and so we can help our families in our communities. So at a cultural level, there are still laws that we're trying to get over and explain and articulate in our minds so we can go back to our own communities and explain it. So, I'll come back to ADA again, they're the bomb. I've been there, they've given me the language that I can articulate to take back to my own people, to talk about a disability, that I understand the stigma around it, shame, and what they used to do back in the day when they had a child with a disability. They would take them to the back of the island and drown them. So, these are the kind of things that we have to create safe spaces and ask permission first before we can have those conversations. And creating a safe space. Work with integrity. Work with the mindset that use of the experts, we understand them. But when it comes to our culture, we hold our culture. We hold our traditions. And if you don't know, ask. Because at the end of the day, we're a collective people. We work together. We become family with one another. And that's another thing too that's not understood in the disability space, is kinship. Kinship is not understood. So if you go and visit a family that needs advocacy support, and they say to you, oh, but we've got a family member. In the Westminster system, that's a conflict of interest. You can't have a family member care for you, Clark. And I won't apologise for it, but English is my second language. So you'll hear me talk Pidgin or Creole every now and then. And if you don't understand, ask Mel, she'll tell you. Oh, so that's better? You don't want me to sing. So, this is the thing. We have to understand the cultural framework of our communities before we can do work, before we can make lives better, before we can give them that voice. It's really important that we capture that cultural makeup and we get that permission to move forward. And that Malo law is understood. So when it comes back to kinship, we can say, no, I care for my sister. Because their sister brought me, I will care for him. And I don't want nobody else to care for him because that's my responsibility. So that comes with kinship, is responsibility. So as advocates, we can work with these families and say, we understand them, but explain to me how you want it to work in your families. How do you want to include that kinship system? Because kinship is a big thing. And I tell you now, if you offend one, you offend the whole community. Sorry about it. Sorry about it. So, so it's about building relationships. It's about sitting back and sustamed. Sustamed means suss it out. Because before we can do business. And, I give an example. I go to North Africa and I see a family sitting around and they're all eating from one bowl. And I'm thinking to myself, hey, I'm a big girl. I can cook it in one bowl myself. I had to suss it out. And reason being, they all eat from one bowl because in the middle of the desert, they get water shipped in. So they only wash one bowl. Makes more sense. So suss it out. It may not seem logic to us, But what is it like in their culture? Simple thing is, if someone with a disability like Uncle Willie, Uncle Will, do you want a male or female? Simple questions like that. Because you're not offending. You're starting to understand what it's like to work in the disability space. Because we ourselves, we still don't want to talk about a disability. So we've got to find that level ground where we find it comfortable to say that I have a child with a disability. So it's all about timing, it's all about seasons, and it's all about how you engage us. We know how to engage you, Fla, but how do you engage us is an important thing for us. And if you don't know, like I said, ask, because you don't want to offend. Because the way you do business, if you offend, they'll turn around and say, ADA, you've not come back here. You've not keep on going because you've been offend my family, so you've not go. So it's about building relationships, then business. And I'm very big on that. Relationships first, business second.
This is so interesting, and I love the learning and the culture and hearing all of this. One thing that kind of jumped out at us at QC when we did some data collection at the end of last year was we had a meeting with Two Spirits, and this sort of thing came up. But what we're also finding out was that concepts like the NDIS were often had little information disseminated to those communities, or they weren't as familiar with them as, say, we were. Because art shows weren't getting that information, and people were caring for their own. So I just found that really interesting that information wasn't really, I guess, properly known to those communities. And it's just interesting to hear about the culture and why that may be. So yeah, really appreciate the learning.
Hey, hello.
Thank you for putting me on the spot. I appreciate it. It is something that's definitely, when we speak about the NDIS, and it is a passion of mine that I've seen in remote communities. There's no conversation around the NDIS. It's not there. And when I started going to remote communities across Queensland, one of the things that I would say is, do you know of the NDIS? Do you know of what the disability space is all about? And they didn't have even an understanding of that at all. There was no documents, no resources getting out to remote communities. And the only things that were getting taken out there were these remote connectors that were meant to be putting people on the NDIS. People were too scared to have those conversations. I don't want to lose my Centrelink payment was one of them. How do we actually, I've got to take my child to where? How do I have those conversations? So I think it's just starting that conversation. And I think it's really important to always just start the friendship first and foremost. The business can come later. We'll get to that. I think that's really important.
Yeah, just following on from that, the challenges and the barriers that our people have with accessing the NDIS, it's still, after so many years, it still surprises me how little that we've moved along to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultural understanding for the NDIS. Just with what you were saying, Cassie, there's just this huge gap, and I'd like to know where the expertise of families in remote communities and regional communities and urban areas where they can have the opportunity to come together and give their lived experiences. I know that there's consultations that happen, there's consultations everywhere, but when are we going to create the space where people can come and talk about multiple complex disabilities. For instance, a mum that I know up north who has a child with high level autism, you know, and she is just so isolated within her own community because that the understanding of autism is not understood, and she's being perceived as a bad mother who gets screamed at and told that, you know, her kid should be flogged or, you know, because he's naughty. So what we're also needing is a space for these people with profound disabilities, complex disabilities, for that space to be created for these people that are having that additional suffering in their own communities because of the lack of the understanding of what that day-to-day reality is. There's so much to say about all this, as Cassie says. You know, for myself, my son has got profound disabilities. He's got profound disabilities, but for me, even to find a Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander planner that can give me cultural safety, and at the request of numerous years, that has still not been able to be offered to me.
Sorry, can I ask a question to you guys out there? If you don't have an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander advocate that can work in your space, what do you do? If you get a client that is Indigenous, that needs help, needs an understanding around the NDIS process and all of the rest of it, where do you go? Or how do you seek information to better serve that community or that family? Is it?
We seek referral pathways to make sure that we can reach out to the appropriate people to help us.
We need a mic.
We seek referral pathways to reach out to the appropriate people who can help us help them.
And that's really important, because when I work in this space and I give advice, and I've come from my previous life, I was a senior advisor for Crime and Corruption Commission. So, you know, I get asked quite often, you know, what's the processes, what's the protocols? And in my mind, I walked away, I thought about it, and I would give them the best advice that I could give them, because I'm not only thinking of myself. When I'm taking non-Indigenous workers out there in the community, I'm thinking about your safety. I'm thinking about how I can better help you do your job, but at the end of the day, you can go home to a family. So when we work in this space as an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander worker, I don't think of myself. I think of my colleagues that are non-Indigenous, and how do I make it safer for them to work with my people. And then once I understand that, only then I open the passage for you for going there. And that relationship's there. So relationships, the first and foremost. When I used to travel with the chair of CCC, Crime and Corruption Commission, up the Cape, and before we travelled, I used to say to the boss, where are you from? Do you have any children? Where did you go to school? And my colleagues are looking at me like, you'll be Doris, you know. But I say, wait. So when I travel to the community would say to them, or Harakun or places like that, they used to say to me, hey, look at that man with you there. I said, well, you look at that man? He went to school here. He's got this many children. He's got this many grandchildren. So automatically, that kinship kicks in. They look at him and think, hey, I'm father. So I will respect this man. I will sit in with him and I will talk for him. So I'm not talking about if you don't find a pathway. I'm not saying for you to go out there and build relationships like knowing everybody's business. No, I'm not saying that. It's about taking time to do business better. That's important. And then we're going to see changes in the disability space because the trust is there. They got relationships with Toby here. They got relationships with Rebecca here. So by the end of their working time with Ada, we're going to go back to the client and say, where's my sissy there? Where's Rebecca? You know, so that's okay. That relationship's there, that trust is there. Then communities are going to start to get better. People are going to start to heal. People are going to want to talk. People are going to want to say, well, they're not going to think I'm stupid because English is my second, third language. Or go sit down there and they go, try understand what I'm saying to you. So relationships are really important. And if you don't know the pathways, ask Sissy here, what pathways you take? Work off one another. Because advocacy can sometimes be a real lonely ship when we think we have to fix everything. You know, there are some days I go home and I'm thinking, man, I talk crap. Yeah, you know, you're saying the same thing, it's repetitive, and you're thinking, have I even made a scratch on the surface here? But another helpful hint as an advocate and working in the disability space, be patient. Be patient because it is tiring as well. You want to say something like that?
No, so yeah. Imagine waking up one morning. So imagine a scene of you're out in the middle of the desert or in the rural remote areas, and you set up camp. And life in this camp was pretty average. You know, people get up in the morning and go about their business and stuff like that. And then and each member of the group has a role and responsibility in contributing towards the way of life in the camp. And one of your jobs is to go and get firewood, you know, to contribute, you know, towards the evening meal. But you've got one arm. How can I carry wood back to the camp? No problem. Extended family. Not without hesitation. Member of the family or member of the camp will come with you and help you gather wood and help you carry it back. No second thoughts. Nothing. It's a way of life. And each and every, as I said, each and every one of the group has a role to play. And if you got one limb missing, or you can't walk, you still have a role to play in community life. So what I mean is that you get up in the morning and you get assisted to go out and sit around the fire. But I can't walk. How can I contribute? No problem. They'll simply assist you by hello. Can you hear me? Yeah. But they'll simply put a big pot in front of you, and they would, and your job is to peel potatoes, peel whatever animal kangaroo that they brought back with them, and your job was to peel. You peel away. You don't have to stand up and walk around and peel. You can sit down and contribute to the community way of life. No questions asked until it's pointed out to you. I remember one occasion, and there's this one particular image also that sticks with me. This young woman was in a place like an institution, and every night for the last 30 odd years, she was being observed by the doctors, saying to each other, why is she surrounding herself with water? This is an Aboriginal woman. Why is she surrounding her bed with water before she goes to bed? And no one could figure it out. They all thought she was Wamba, that's Wamba in the head, as the word says. They couldn't figure it out until it was later explained to them that she was simply following her culture, her way of life. She surrounded her bed with water because she could sleep easy. No bad spirits will cross water to harm her. And that's why she was surrounding herself with water. And there was another occasion, and Arnie Seamer would know this as well. We were invited to a seminar at one of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander health organisations about the NDIS. We fronted up there, and we listened to what they said. Unfortunately, we did more than they did, didn't we, Arnie? Because we ended up taking over the place. Because we knew more than what the presenters were telling the audience, because I think they were just there, as a showpiece.
Can I just add to that one?
Yeah.
So I think really following on from what Willie's saying is, well, how do we grow the strength of advocacy for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, but not only just Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, for the core community, the non-Indigenous communities, where we're being left behind. And also to be able to offer our knowledge so that we can grow confidence in the area of non-Indigenous advocates who work in that space. So I think it's not about service bashing or, putting people down who, I just think it's about that really positive, genuine step forward. How do we all grow? Instead of the top-down stuff that keeps happening, especially for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And how do we really work on those challenges that prevent us from going forward? How do we say that, as Ani Elsha was saying, that you need to understand relationships and culture to be able to comprehend what we need. So I think there's a need in advocacy to say, for advocates to call and say, we want to be able to work together with people from all different areas, whether they're core communities, First Nations communities, remote communities, regional communities, so that we can all build confidence together to grow, because, the business model that's sitting centre stage of human services for human beings is really become, in my experience, damaging to my person, my family, my culture, the people that I work with, the people that I support. So, I know that the NDIS is an insurance model, but my son and people like my son with disabilities, they are not a boat, they are not a house, they are not a car. And I feel that human voice, that human element is slipping away from my grasp sometimes. And I'm sitting in this in this area of people with disabilities where mental health is just going straight through the roof. So that's just something of my observations, but I'm not sure.
Can I just add to what Sissy was saying about language? You know, information needs to be deliverable where we all understand it. And that's the hard thing, is talking to my people in a language where they scratch their head and say, what you talk about? You know, and I give my mum as an example. I call her up and I say, Mum, you better come down because Lee's, my brother, is suffering depression. And her answer, my mum being old school, she's 90 nearly, she turned around and she says, oh, what's wrong with him? I said, they've got head sore sickness and depressed and sad, you know, I'm describing it the way she can articulate it. But her response to me was, tell them go to church and drink water. You know, that's what we've got to fight with our own families and our own communities about. Yeah, we have to advocate about what a disability is first before we can move forward. So, you know, and I love my mum, bless her heart, but, you know, if you're feeling sick, go to church and drink water, everything's the same also. But you've got to explain it in a way that they understand it.
And being really serious about that, when Elsha's talking, giving that example, then that widens the gap of helping our people, because we're trying with disabilities who needs the supports, who have high complex needs, because our mothers and our people on the island or in our remote communities, they say, you know, go to church and drink water, but there's disability needs that need to be met, and if these aren't being heard at the level where they need to be heard, where are they going to be heard?
Thank you so much. And I definitely think if anyone hasn't read or watched the story on Mungo Man, it's a beautiful story about being included in the hunt back in the days. It was a one-legged man, and it teaches you about the inclusivity, I can't say that word, of our mob. We've never been one to build castles or walls. We've always lived on camp with each other at the same level. There was never no hierarchy. We were inclusive of everyone regardless of who they were and where they come from. And Mungo Man is a great story on that if anyone wants to read that or watch it. It's just because Mungo Man has different imprints in the sand, he was still included in the hunt. Just because it wasn't 2 feet, it was a stick and 1 foot, he still got the hunt done regardless. You know, the mob just created him a walking stick, so he was included. They broke down those barriers to make sure that he was included in his culture and in the hunt. And I think that's one thing I think Elsha was saying too, is that we have mob from everywhere. You could be saltwater, freshwater, desert mob. Everyone speaks their own language from where they come from, so making sure you're asking those questions and being respectful about them, about who they are and where they're from. Everyone speaks different lingo. Like the lingo that I speak here is probably totally different to down south. I was just talking to Auntie Elsa and Auntie Seema about it, about going away and working in a different country. I'm not from there. I don't speak their lingo. I can't go there. Like, that's cultural protocol. Like, if I told my mother and father that, they'd be like, no, you're not going there. Like, you know. So having that respect and just asking questions if you don't know goes a long way. And when mob hear you ask those questions, they're like, oh, they're taking the time to get to know me, building that connection. And they can feel your energy too. And if you're stressed and trying to get one form done quickly, that's your time frame, not theirs. Have a bit of grace about yourselves. Yes, I know you have time frames and deadlines to meet, but mob wants you to take the time to get to know them and be a bit more gracious and just patient. That goes a long way. Yeah. Louise, we'd love to hear from you. So, in your role at QAI as the Queensland Advocacy for Inclusion Indigenous Advocate, yes? So what's most important about the work that you do right now?
Thank you. Now I know how to word this. Good morning, everybody. So I'd like to share a little bit about my role to begin with. So I am a non-legal advocate working with Indigenous people with disabilities across Queensland. There are 3 components to my role at QAI. So I do individual advocacy, which is mostly discrete one-off advice sessions. Sometimes they turn into ongoing support, which is short-term. We develop an advocacy plan with some goals and we really focus on working on those. Additionally, I provide cultural support for my QAI colleagues, such as the legal advocates, who are providing support to First Nation clients in the legal space. So I sit in on those sessions where that's appropriate and provide some information or guidance to my colleagues, but also looking for like signs and indicators when talking with the person about what other informal supports and community supports they have and can access. And also do a little bit of outreach. So we look for opportunities to visit communities, and we've done a couple of visits up to Cherbourg over the last few months to participate in the community events up there. We're also hoping to be holding a stall at the NAIDOC events that are coming up, probably in the Logan area. So we're helping to spread the word of disability advocacy services and to start developing those connections in the community with the aim of developing the trust that's been mentioned a few times, developing the trust in our service. So it's important to reach those people in remote and rural communities to let them know that services like this are available, to provide quality advice and support in a timely manner, and to help elevate the voices of those people who need it. Took some notes.
Goodbye. Thank you so much. I'd love to hear from Michaela and Cassie and Bridget and Mitch too, please. What's most important about the work you're doing right now?
I just want to highlight one word that always gets used, which is the word resilient. And it's, to me, it's a beautiful and powerful word, but it means we had to go through so much to be resilient. I'm resilient because I had to do it this way. I'm resilient because I had to stand up when no one else would. You know, so that word, though, is very much in advocacy. I wish we didn't have to be resilient. I wish we just could be. I think one of the things and the stories that I would say is that I've spent a lot of time working across Queensland in remote communities. And one of the things that I hope to never see again, and the reason why I do what I do, is I went to Thursday Island and I was visiting, and it was my first day of getting there, so I was like, I'm not booking anything, I'm walking around. I'm seeing this beautiful island. And I also got lost, and it's only 5 kilometres around. So, yeah. So, I mean, look, I'm a girl from Yeppoon, I know my streets, that's it. So, when I was there, there's a beautiful park right next to the community centre there, and there was a lady and her child was playing. And I was like, oh, why is he not in school? How old is he? You know, asking all the Dory questions. And she was like, oh no, he's not going to school, he's staying with me. And after just sitting for a while and she asking me questions, we got to talking, and one of the things was that the teacher had noticed that her son was behind and wasn't getting all of the things done that he needed to get done and wasn't meeting the required timeframes. And she said, your son has autism. And she was like, I don't know what that is, but I got angry. No, he doesn't. He's fine. And she got mad and left the school with her son and then went home. And then they decided to bring the police around, and all of these other issues occurred from that. So she was not sending her son back to school because she was afraid she was going to lose her son. From that conversation, I was willing to take it, because obviously I'm not on their island all the time, but to take that conversation further and take it to people that could explain more what autism was and what it meant and all of those things. It was the conversation that doesn't get to happen. There's so many islands off the Torres Straits, except only 2 have a remote connector because they can't afford to visit the other islands. This is why I do what I do, because we need to be able, everyone deserves to have a conversation about all disabilities and what they are.
Mitch, would you like to add?
Sure.
Cool. So what's been really cool with we've seconded over to QAI since kind of mid to late last year, till the end of June at least. And we've been working on a pilot program to look at advocacy in the queer disability space. And there are so many gaps in that we can say, and we're launching a bit of a resource later on, that we do need our own advocacy organisation for people with disability who are queer, because there's so many complexities. There's issues around accessibility, events, nightlife, NDIS, that thing again. Even we had conversations around Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who might be queer or disabled, and disclosures and feeling safe to do so around certain people and what culture said about that, and who could know and who couldn't, and when they felt comfortable. It was a real lot of learning. We've been collecting qualitative data and quantitative data when we can, but there is absolutely a need for a queer disabled advocacy service. And the resource we're launching later today is a bit of a guide for advocates to kind of think about what they're doing and how they're doing it when they might be dealing with a person in that space.
Yeah.
You can add on, Paulie.
Hey?
You can add to that if you want.
What? Yeah, what can I say? I'm a living book. Every page you turn tells a story about who I am and what I am. Don't go looking up digital books on your phone or anything. They'll tell a story, yeah, but each and every one of us here that's sitting in front of you is a living book, and it's a book. It won't fade away like books will do. It's there for eternity, and so when you go to a library, they got certain libraries in Europe where we can go walk into a library and sit down next to a person, and they'll tell you about themselves. It's like a living book experience, yeah. So you don't go in there and read books, you go there and listen to people tell their stories and stuff like that. And what am I going to say is that I'm a person with lived experience. I wasn't really educated, to the extent of getting a scholarship or anything like that. But it was purely hard work on my behalf and my lived experience that got me through to where I am today. With the help of many people along my journey, they just added to the page. Yeah, what I can say is these 3 words: hear me, see me, and respect me.
Hi guys, I'm not much of a speaker, so I'll be a little bit short. but what we're finding challenging up in the far north regional areas is funding. Obviously, we want to get out into community, do face-to-face, but when it comes to once every 3 months or once a month, it makes it a little bit hard to establish that relationship. So that's what we're finding a huge challenge. And I do like the vouching system that you said, Anielsha. It does work. You have to go in and it has to be an informal kind of approach. I think we just did a visit to Mount Isa and they didn't even know much about advocacy. So it's still, we might talk about it right now and try and reach out, but it's still a huge gap that needs to be filled, especially up in the northern region. Kinship is also a huge thing. Seeing children separated from their parents, like getting dragged from Mount Isa, Palm Island, and then put in Townsville. You know, it's far away from family. They didn't even consider that. And then you've gone to QCAT guardianship, where social workers are uninformed. You know, they're instantly putting orders on without doing the search for kinship or informal supports. And then you're looking at the mental health unit, because we do have a lot of intellectual impairments as well, so that's quite a misunderstood disability in the Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander area as well. So I think community awareness is probably the hugest gap that we've had to face, and getting people to collaborate together and work with you, because I feel like everyone's wanting to do the same thing, but we're all going in different directions. So we all have the same goal, it's just we need to come together and collaborate.
So just listening to what you were saying there, and I think we all can relate to it, we all understand it, we all get frustrated about that. So how then are we going to create the community awareness? And who needs to respond to the community awareness that's needed? I know it's all about funding and things like that, but we're talking, what's coming up repeatedly today is about the communication, the relationships. So how do we go forward to say that this is a need that needs to happen? Am I being naive to ask such a question with the constraints, funding restraints? But if that's something that is the core need, what do we need to discuss to think about going forward with that?
Yeah, I'm just going to say something for a second. Yeah, I was going to say, when you first of all, before you come in community to come and talk to us about our things, you first must be able to create a culturally safe place for our mob to sit and talk to you. Because if you don't have that culturally safe space, you won't get the kind of responses that you really want from our community.
Sorry. But in saying that too, there's two different things as advocates. We're out to help with their rights. But in the Indigenous space, there's rights and obligation. And I'll give an example. I have a nephew who's non-verbal, severe disability. So my brother goes away and he comes home and his support worker has locked him up in his room. And mind you, my nephew's 22. Locked him up in a room and he's watching porn. His support workers put porn on. My brother was furious because first and foremost, his responsibility is to his sisters. Even though my nephew's non-verbal, severely disabled, his obligation is a brother to his sisters. And my brother was beside himself. He says, what if his sisters walk in? But the support workers argued, and but that's his right. And I get that. But
his cultural obligations come first and foremost. And that cultural obligation is he's a big brother to 2 sisters. He's an uncle to his nephews. And in the kinship system, he's a grandfather to his grandchildren. So the cultural obligation, as far as I'm concerned, anything cultural is trump over any procedures. So this is what we're faced with when we're trying to explain it to our families in relation to kinship law, cultural law. I understand that, but under the Westminster system, they've got rights. Stuff the rights. My boy, my nephew is my boy, and he's a father and brother and uncle. So he has to live up to that and set an example for his family, even though he's non-verbal. So this is the thing that we have as advocates. We understand the rights, but sit down and ask, okay, what are their cultural obligations? What are those things that we have to consider before we go into that home and help them with business? So that's really, that's really important. I don't know about you, but you must be getting hungry.
I was just about to say we only got a couple minutes left, darling. So I would like to thank our elders and our advocates for sharing your stories and wisdom with all of us. I would also like to thank the community advocates, disability advocates who shared their work and the challenges they face when standing alongside people with disability. Please join me in thanking our speakers for their work.